Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's review, we have got a single style review for you, and it's from two different brewers, both of which I have never had a beer from prior. So always look forward to jumping into new beers by new brewers and seeing what they're about. This is another Tavour review. I keep getting just tons of great beers that are popping up that I can't get in my local market. So I absolutely continue using Tavour. I love this service. Nonetheless, today we are going to be exploring Kölsch beers. That's K-O with the two dots. That's an umlaut, L-S-C-H. Pronounced Kölsch, not Kölsch. The first beer is from Exhibit A Brewing Company. This is called Goody Shoes, and it clocks in at 4.5% ABV. They are based out of Framingham, Massachusetts. Beer number two is from the Separatist Beer Project. This one's called Lifestyle, also 4.5% ABV, and they're based out of Perkasie, Pennsylvania. I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing that city correctly because I have no earthly clue. But nonetheless, we've got two brewers I've never had beers from, both the same style, so even footing, Kölsch for both, 4.5% ABV on both, and yeah, it's about as even of take on the playing field to see which I think is the better Kölsch. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in with Exhibit A Brewing Company's Goody Shoes. This one clocks in at 4.5% ABV. Okay, so jumping right in with the first beer of today's Tavour Kölsch review, we have got Exhibit A Brewing Company's Goody Shoes. They're based out of Framingham, Massachusetts, and this, as is the second beer, clocks in at 4.5% ABV. So I have never had any beers from Exhibit A prior, so I'm particularly excited. I always love trying beers from new brewers that I've never had. Let's start with the label art. It's relatively plain, but it's got a rear view of somebody wearing what looks like boots. You know, pretty basic. Looks like a pen or a pencil drawing. And then on the opposite side of the can, it's the same shot, but from the front side with the boots. So kind of cool. I appreciate it. And I always like the pen and pencil kind of drawing style on beer labels. I'm a personal fan, but nonetheless, let's get this one cracked. All right. Be gentle here. Okay. Didn't get away from me. Let's just get this one poured right in. All right. Yeah, that's a nice looking Kölsch right there. Got that classic pale yellow. Now, Kölsches do share similarities with Keller beers or cellar beers in German, but in general, a Kölsch is going to be a heck of a lot lighter. The straw color is the norm, and this is looking very, very textbook. And they do tend to be quite active in terms of carbonation and do typically form a nice creamy head, as this one did. Holding it up visually, yeah, that's textbook. It's quite a lovely looking beer. It's quite pale. Not dissimilar in color to, say, a Pilsner, but in general, Kölsch is going to be even lighter still. So this is very much kind of that straw kind of color, very pale yellow. In terms of carbonation, it's quite active. It's quite active indeed. I see a really good mix of different size bubbles coming up. Really, really small, fine champagne-like, and kind of medium. I don't see anything too big, but it is just going. It is just absolutely going there. Looks great. Let's give it a sniff. Oh, that smells so nice. That smells so fresh. This has a textbook Kölsch aroma. So what you smell with them, you get a slight, almost honey-like sweetness in general, and you can smell the malt bill, and the nose typically tells you what you're going to get into. So it does share some elements with other beer styles, notably this kind of baked good quality about it. So it's got that kind of bread and biscuit and crumb and toast and crust edge to it, and it just smells great. I mean, this so far is looking and smelling textbook. I'm going to just top this off just a tick more here. Don't want to go too crazy. All right. Let's jump right in. Let's give it a sip. Oh, that's a fine Kölsch. Oh, it's actually got a little interesting element to it that I didn't anticipate. Okay, so my initial thoughts when you get it in your mouth, this is very much a textbook Kölsch. That said, that kind of honey sweet side that you can often get in the style is quite pronounced in this. Now I could smell it on the aroma, so I expected it to come through in the flavor, but it's really quite pronounced and it's quite pleasant. What I did not anticipate is this specific beer has a slight clovey hint to it, akin to Hefeweizen. It's got that kind of clovey back to it, which I did not expect. That is not common in a Kölsch, but it's quite nice and it works well and seems to pair well with that very honey-like quality. In terms of the rest of the malt bill, the baked good kind of edge you could really smell absolutely comes through. Textbook in this beer. And it has that nice, clean, crisp, slightly brute, dry finish to it. And it is very, very textbook in terms of a Kölsch. Indeed, this could compete side by side with any German Kölsch I've ever had. It really is that good of an example of what a Kölsch is. It's just got this other interesting element with that kind of Hefeweizen yeast-like cloviness to it. And it's not huge. It's just enough that, wow, that's interesting. That's nice. I didn't expect that. And indeed I didn't. I'm going to jump back in and explore body and mouthfeel and how the flavors develop. In terms of body, it's medium light, which is exactly where I expected it to be for the ABV range and the style. It's textbook there. Mouthfeel, same thing. Feels very effervescent. It's not super thick. It's not super viscous. It's not supposed to be. It's exactly right for the style. If you start to agitate it around the palate, it does get quite creamy. Again, very textbook for the style, and a lot of beers do this. These really do cream up, and it tends to happen with the more highly carbonated beers that'll happen. If you start to agitate it around the palate, they're just so active, it just keeps going and going and going. So it gets very, very creamy. So in general, when I'm drinking beers like this, when I'm trying to explore the flavor development, I do agitate them quite a lot around the palate. It lets everything get coated and opens it up so all the flavors can develop. But once I'm done exploring and coming up with the beer, this is a style much like a Pils where I would just sip. I'm not going to roll it around my palate, just as a side note. But it's very, very nice. I'm going to jump back in for a finish here and exactly where the flavors come. It's a beautiful, bright, this classic Kölsch up front. And then that honey hits you and that slight cloviness hits you. Then both of those elements get out of the way within the first few seconds. And then you're just left with this classic Kölsch, very baked good-like malt bill that just comes through and it's just so good. It's just so good and refreshing. And it's super clean. It gets that nice brute edge to it and just finishes super clean. Now I can tell you, Kölsches typically don't have the longest finish in the world, and it wouldn't be a knock if it was quite short. This actually has a lot more staying power in terms of flavor lingering long after each sip. That's not a bad thing because it still has all the classic hallmarks of a Kölsch, including that nice, crisp, dry finish. But the flavor, it's just got this intensity that cuts through and it really sticks around. It's very, very enjoyable. So I'm still getting to taste all of that baked goodness to it. It's got a very, very long finish for a Kölsch, and I'm a fan. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second Kölsch of today's review, and that is Separatist Beer Project's Lifestyle. That one also clocks in at 4.5% ABV. Okay, now moving on to the second beer of today's Tavour Kölsch review, we have got Separatist Beer Project's Lifestyle. Just as with the first, this one clocks in at exactly 4.5% ABV, and Separatist Beer Project is based out of Perkasie, Pennsylvania. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm not entirely certain. Nonetheless, in terms of label art, it's relatively understated, nothing too crazy, but it does have a pretty neat design on the label. I rather like it. It looks rather neat. Nothing else to talk about there, so to speak, so let's go ahead and get this one cracked. All right, gently. Great. And poured right in the glass. All right, and just as with the first, as I'm pouring it, I can see this has the classic telltale, very light straw, pale yellow color. This one's not getting away from me quite so bad in terms of effervescence, but it ought to pour and form a decent head here. I was a bit more gentle out of the gate, so that kept it under control. Yeah, that looks great. Okay. Visually, this is essentially indistinguishable from the first in terms of color. Carbonation, just as with the first, it's very, very active, though. I don't see a lot of super fine champagne-like bubbles in here. I see mostly kind of medium-sized ones, but looks great. Head formed well. It's holding well. Let's give this a sniff. There it is. This, pretty much identical to the first. It smells exactly like a classic Kölsch aroma and exactly how they come off. That very classic kind of baked good like malt back smell, which I expect to be in full force when I take a sip. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Oh yeah, it's very nice. Up front, that classic slight honey-like sweetness. And that actually holds in this one for a decent amount of time. I'd say a good 5, 6, 7 seconds before the classic malt bill character traits kind of really come into their own, where you get the kind of biscuity and bread and crust and kind of crumb quality that comes through. But it comes through and it mixes almost an even part to this kind of honey-like sweetness and this baked good-like quality to it. And it holds and it holds and it's pretty long. Now this one does finish still with a nice crispness to it, but it is not anywhere near as brutish and dry as the first beer was. So this is a lot more wet in terms of the way that the mouthfeel is throughout the duration of it and certainly on the end of the finish. But very much a classic Kölsch flavor profile here. I'm going to jump back in for body and mouthfeel. We know on the finish, but just throughout the course here. Body, just as with the first, it's very much a medium light. It's exactly what I expect for the style in the ABV range. In terms of the mouthfeel, this one definitely is a lot more wet throughout from the front, certainly in the middle, and it really doesn't get but slightly dry at the very, very, very end of the finish. Overall, this is a lot wetter feeling Kölsch. It doesn't have a lot of brutish, dry factor to it. In terms of flavor development, it's really that honey sweetness up front, and then that holds, like I said, for a good several seconds, and then the kind of classic malt bill comes in, and that holds pretty even, and they're going almost dead 50-50, this honey-like and the classic Kölsch malt bill characteristics, and they hold, and again, just as with the first beer, the flavor on this one, in terms of length of the finish, it's very, very long. Each sip lasts quite a long time. You don't always get that with the Kölsch. I'd say it's not the norm. And it's certainly not a bad thing. It's just more to enjoy. And it still gives you this nice, crisp, clean finishing sensation to the end. I really, really enjoy this. This is, you know, a style that I will drink any time of the year, though they are particularly great in hot weather, which I record well in advance, but when I'm recording this, it is late October of 2019, and down in Tampa, it's still quite hot. So, I mean, this is still a great choice for me to jump in while the rest of the country is cooling down. We're still in the 80s most days. One more sip for final thoughts here. This one does get quite creamy if you really agitate it heavily around the palate. Very, very creamy. And it adds a little thickness to the mouthfeel. Now the mouthfeel on this, aside from the finish, classic Kölsch, it's wet and it's effervescent and it feels exactly right. I mean, really, both of these beers are really well put together examples of what a Kölsch can and should be. Just fantastic. I'm going to take my time sipping on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with the Exhibit A Brewing Company's Goody 2 Shoes. This 4.5% ABV, as they both are. Kölsch review here, and Exhibit A Brewing Company is based out of Framingham, Massachusetts. Starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was classic Kölsch. I knew exactly what I was going to be getting into before I even took my first sip, and it had a really pronounced aroma even for a Kölsch. It's not a super pungent style, but this one really did a great job of making its way out of the glass, and it smelled spot on. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste, I thoroughly enjoyed this beer. And indeed, there was an element about this beer that is not common in a Kölsch, and that was it had this slight clove-like quality, much akin to, say, a German Hefeweizen. Though completely different beer style, so I'm sure there was no Hefeweizen yeast used in this beer, but it did have this slight cloviness to it, which I personally really enjoyed, though it's not typical for the style. I did dock 1 point because of that. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the body on this was textbook Kölsch. It was exactly what I expected for the ABV range and for the style. Perfect execution. It gets a 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, same story here. This is a beer style that kind of runs the gamut. You can get a little bit wetter up front and wet more or less all the way through to the end. Some are just completely wet. Some are far more brutish and dry. This one really did a good job of having all of those classic mouthfeel elements, including the high effervescent quality and not a lot of viscosity. That's not typical for the style and certainly for the ABV range, and what I got was exactly what I expected. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Finish on this beer. Finish on this beer was excellent. It had all the hallmarks of a classic Kölsch, where it did give you this nice, crisp, clean finish, but the flavor in this beer really stuck around in the back of the palate, and it didn't really produce an effect that let me think, okay, this is not finishing super clean and super crisp, because it did. It was just an added bonus that I still got to taste that delicious malt bill for quite an extended period of time. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Head and retention, this was really quite a nice head that it formed and retained for Kölsch poured at home. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Appearance, this was textbook Kölsch. That light straw yellow pale color, super active in terms of effervescence. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was excellent. I really enjoyed the interplay of the slight bit of the hop character that you get and that really nice classic Kölsch malt bill. Really for me though, to help accentuate and extend out kind of the enjoyment of this style, I like the malt bill to be a little more present. It's a malt bill that's not dissimilar to other classic German styles, but in the form of a Kölsch with that super light refreshing, and then you get the backbone of those baked goods. I really like that to stick out, and this did a great job, but it wasn't top tier in that respect. I docked 1 point, it gets a 9 out of 10. Filling in the Intangible, I absolutely loved it. This is as good of a Kölsch as any I've had from Germany. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, I nitpicked just a couple categories, and it was just 1 point each, and really, frankly, in the grand scheme of things, this is a top tier Kölsch. If you're a fan of this style, this is one to seek. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10, which brings the Exhibit A Brewing Company's Goody 2 Shoes to a 98 out of 100. So massively high score here. This is a world-class Kölsch that is well worth your time if you can get your hands on it. Moving on to beer number 2. This is the Separatist Beer Project Lifestyle. Also 4.5% ABV on this one, and they're based out of Perkasie, Pennsylvania. The aroma. The aroma on this beer was nice, though it was not anywhere near as pungent as on the prior beer. And in general, it's not a super pungent style, but I did have a challenge kind of getting a sense of what I was going to get into for that first sip. I got a little bit of it, but not as much as I would have liked. It is above average. It gets a 7 out of 10. For the taste, I thought the taste absolutely nailed it. Very akin to the first one, only it didn't have any kind of clovey quality to it, which frankly, as much as I enjoyed it, it's not appropriate for the style. This was textbook Kölsch. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the body and the mouthfeel on this one, the exact same as on the first beer that we sampled. It was textbook body, exactly what I expected. Textbook mouthfeel, exactly what I expected. It gets a 10 for both the body and the mouthfeel. Moving on to the finish. Finish on this beer was exactly the same story as on the first beer as well. It had that classic Kölsch finish where it was super clean and crisp and a little dryness, but the flavors themselves really stuck around and you got to keep enjoying that classic baked good malt bill in the back. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Head and retention. Head and retention on this one was nice. It was certainly above average for being poured at home, but it was not up to the same level as on the Goody 2 Shoes. It was above average though. It gets a 7 out of 10. Moving on to the appearance, this was another case where it was just textbook Kölsch. That pale straw yellow color, super active carbonation is exactly what I expect to see. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was exceptional. In my opinion, I thought they nailed it. It had all the classic hallmarks of a Kölsch, and it was just balanced beautifully. So nothing overshadowed anything else. There were no funky off flavors or any unexpected twists and turns. It was a classic Kölsch executed perfectly, balanced perfectly. Gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the Intangible, I loved it. I loved both of these. I thought they were both stellar Kölsches. Gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, I did nitpick a couple categories here, notably aroma and head and retention. Now, bearing in mind that I poured this at home, the head and retention, I can let go a little bit. And for the aroma, again, I really nitpicked this one comparative to the prior. It definitely had the right aroma, and it definitely had all of the hallmarks that I expect in a Kölsch. It just wasn't as intense compared to the first. But that being said, a Kölsch is not a style that's known for its pungent aroma, and what I did pick up was classic Kölsch. I did not dock any points as an example of the style because I think the whole package is just superb. It gets a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Separatist Beer Project's lifestyle to a 94 out of 100. So all total, we're only looking at a 4-point spread between these beers, a 98 and a 94, and I don't think I need to tell you that that is very high scores indeed. Both of these are absolute world-class examples of what a Kölsch can and should be, and if you're a fan of this style, I highly recommend both of these beers. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you can click the notification bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.